Welcome once again to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowning with Campbellsville University. Today I'm pleased to be interviewing a guest, Mr. O.J. Oleka, our recently appointed president of the Association of Independent Colleges here in Kentucky. O.J., welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here, John.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. You're new to our audience here in Campbellsville.
Yeah, sure. Well, to understand me, it's always important to understand who my father was.
Yes.
My parents came to the United States from Nigeria. My father grew up in abject poverty in a small village. He lost his father by the time that he was 4 years old. But he ended up getting a good and decent education in a headmaster system. The headmaster was cruel to him, but he got a good one in Nigeria. And he got this wild idea, as many people do around the world, let me go see what this greatest country I keep hearing about is like. So he asked my mother to come to the United States, and it was here that he went to a private liberal arts institution, a Bible college, Wheaton College. Many of your
Very fine school.
listeners may be familiar with it. And he got a bachelor's degree there, ended up going to Michigan State and getting a master's and a PhD. And my mother got a degree in nursing. And then they came to a place called Kentucky and raised 3 kids, bought a house, and basically lived the American dream. I share that story because a lot of folks are Kentuckians by birth. I was fortunate enough to be Kentuckian by my parents' choice, and my wife and I have stayed here. And that's one of the things that's been critically important to me to kind of understand who I am, that foundation. So I grew up in Frankfort, went to the University of Louisville for undergrad, went to Bellarmine for my MBA, and I'm still there for my PhD. So there's a lot of education in my background, and I'm excited to be in that world today.
Appreciate your sharing that story, and very compelling story, and sharing your story of your father and mother coming from Nigeria to America, and one that many, many people have pursued in coming to America and fulfilling, as you said, the American dream. Now, why did you decide to become a candidate for the presidency of this organization called IQ? And tell us about, we in higher ed, like in government and other sectors, we throw a lot of acronyms out, but the Association of Independent Kentucky Colleges and Universities.
That's it. That's exactly right.
Tell us about why you decided to pursue the presidency and what IQ is all about.
Sure. Well, it actually stems from the previous story about my father and that experience. When I was at U of L, I had the chance to get more involved in educational opportunities. I was president of my scholarship organization and was president of the Student Government Association, which meant I represented students at U of L in board meetings. I also had the chance to be the chair of the Kentucky Board of Student Body Presidents, which meant that I represented our institutions in conversation with then Governor Steve Beshear. And as I was figuring out what to do next, I sat down with my dad and said, what are some things that I can do? And he said, well, think about your life. Think about what you've been able to accomplish and the blessings that you've had. And I really thought about the education that I've been afforded. And unfortunately, not every kid in our country gets a great quality education, so I wanted to contribute to that. So long story short, I taught for a couple years middle school math in a low-income community, and it was there that I saw if kids had a great quality education and their parents, the adults in the communities, had good quality, decent jobs, you could effectively end poverty overnight. And we know that poverty is a set of conditions. It's how much you make and how much you're able to spend, where you're able to live, and your health care and some of those environments. But a lot of that stems from educational opportunities. So I developed what you call a big goal, which is to end generational poverty in the United States. Again, seems very daunting, but if you can really figure out and focus on some specific key issues, education being one of them, then you can really fix some things. So basically in my career, I wanted to make sure that I could do whatever would contribute to that. Our institutions at IQ, the independent colleges, are working on this every day. Our institutions focus greatly on providing educational opportunities and resources for people who typically haven't had it. A lot of folks may not know, but half of the students that go to our institutions are Pell Grant eligible, which means they come from low-income backgrounds. Well, this was right up my alley, and this is what I wanted to promote and make sure that we could talk about. So when I got the call that Gary was retiring and there was going to be an opportunity there, I really wanted to share that vision and what I think that I could contribute based on my background and based on what I think IQ ought to be doing. So the board agreed, and here I am with you today.
Right. And we welcome you and congratulate you. Dr. Gary Cox was president of IQ and did a fantastic job, very good friend, frequent guest on the show. But I certainly think IQ is in good hands under your tenure And I know that Dr. Cox, as well as Dr. Michael Carter, our president, who happens to be the chairman of the board
That's right.
and chair of the search committee who
That's
hired
right.
you,
That's
obviously
right.
he thinks that IQ is in good hands under your leadership. But you did note that the member schools, the 18 schools, many people have this misconstrued notion that private higher education is the bastion of the elite and the wealthy, and to some extent that is the image that the media and others portray. But for most of the schools in Kentucky, most of really all the schools, that is not the fact.
No,
Comment
it's not
on
the
that
case.
some more.
Sure, it's not the case. And one of the things that you really want to pay attention to is how much aid students are receiving when they go to institutions. Because obviously, as we have the conversation about affordability and access for higher education, being able to pay for it is a significant aspect of that.
Indeed.
With our institutions, our private institutions, the members of IQ, 98% of the students who go to those schools receive some type of institutional aid. 98%. Meaning 98% need some additional supports aside from whatever they're able to contribute on their own. I think that's significant. The average aid is also $17,000. So when you think about that, most folks are getting aid, as we've just established. For every 100 kids that come to one of our schools, 98% of them are receiving some type of support. $17,000 is that average. The reason why that matters is because our institutions are private. We don't get direct funding from the public. We don't get direct funding from state government. We don't get direct funding from the federal government, meaning these institutions in particular saying we want to make sure that students in Kentucky are able to afford a great quality education that matches their values. And that's an important distinction that our institutions are able to offer.
All of that aid, a substantial amount of that aid, is not federal or state aid either.
That's exactly right.
It's student aid. There is Pell Grant and KTG and KEYS and CAP at the state level, but much of that is institutional aid.
Well, and exactly, and what you've just laid out, those are even different than the institutional aid. So to kind of break it down for your listeners, there is the lottery fund, which generates, of course, receipts and proceeds and profits. That money, based on statute, is to go to education for 3 specific programs. KEYS, which is probably the one that everybody's familiar with, which is the Kentucky Educational Excellence Scholarship. That's what you get when you do good in high school. You get good grades and you get a strong ACT score. There are monies there that you can get up to $2,000 a year if you go to any college in Kentucky, public or private. Then you have the College Access Program, which is a grant, which is for students in need. And basically, if you also are going at least half time to either a public or private institution, you can get up to a couple grand as well a year. And then there is KTG. That's the Kentucky Tuition Grant, which is explicitly for low-income students that go to private institutions that get an associate or a bachelor's degree. That's different aid altogether. So you look at that, plus Pell, plus the institutional aid that we mentioned before, that could be up to $20,000, $30,000 in some cases that students are able to get to cover the cost of their education. So this notion that private institutions aren't doing their part or that they aren't affordable is simply one that isn't accurate, and that our institutions are going through great pains to make sure people know they can come to our campuses and they're welcome there.
Just for the record, and we're on the subject, I'll editorialize a little bit and point out that just this year, Campbellsville University is putting over $26 million in institutional aid on the table for our students to make it affordable. And often our students I can't speak for the other 17 except in generalities, but I can speak for Campbellsville in specificity. Very often we can write the out-of-pocket expense for our students down to comparable, if not less than, the public universities.
Absolutely, and as you well know, because of those things that Campbellsville is doing, Campbellsville graduates have some of the lowest debt levels in Kentucky and in the country, and that's exactly what we want our institutions to be doing.
Affordability is the issue facing higher education in general.
It is.
What other things must we be doing, do you think, OJ, to tackle that issue? It's not going away.
Well, it's a big one, and it's rooted in both real dollar costs, but also perception. I am a researcher by trade. I'm getting my PhD at one of our institutions, and part of what I look at is social capital and how students are able to view their affordability opportunities. a lot of students drop out or stop out, as it's called, in the field because of financial anxiety. And anxiety can be caused by any number of issues, but it's certainly psychological, meaning you could be able to afford something, but because you think you can't, now you can't. And so as a result, students will decide not to go back to college. They won't get that credential, they won't get that certification, and they'll try to go directly into the workforce. But this is on top of maybe having some debt. So now you've got debt attached to your name for an educational degree you didn't get. It's like going to the car lot and purchasing a car and then going back home on foot. Or trying to get a mortgage for a house, but you never actually move in. It's a significant challenge, which brings us to the real dollar cost side. What our institutions and what colleges and universities can do is be innovative for their communities. One thing that's incredibly important now, again, that Campbellsville is doing really well, is thinking about workforce needs and workforce challenges. If our institutions are able to get a close relationship with the business community, then they can ask employers, what are you looking for? What do you need? What types of skills, what types of credentials? So that could be anything from certification to HVAC to electricity to plumbing. Again, these are a lot of things that Campbellsville is doing, but also making the case for why a liberal arts education is useful for innovation. How it's important to think, to be a critical thinker, and to really be imaginative, which is, of course, what a liberal arts degree allows you to do.
Liberal arts is still important.
Absolutely.
It's not necessarily the route for everyone.
Sure, and that's the thing. It's figuring out what works for each student by having conversations with employers, and then as an institution being nimble enough to make those changes.
What are some of your goals for IQ as a president?
We've got a very clear set of goals, actually. My team and I were sitting down in terms of what we want to accomplish in the first 100 days in the first year. One of the things we really want to do is build relationships. It's important that we're going out there to make the case for our institutions. Talking with you is exactly how we do that. We tell folks about the importance of affordability, how our institutions are making sure that things can be affordable for the students that go. So we really want to build relationships, but also those relationships should snowball into strategic partnerships. It's not just enough to have good friends in the higher education community or the business community. It really is developing clear relationships that allow our students to have a more affordable and successful experience, but also our institutions. We want to make sure our institutions are on a level playing field in terms of the dollars that they spend, that they're all in the black with regard to their revenues and expenditures. And we think that IQ can play a significant role in that. And then the final one is community. Our institutions, by and large, of the 18, I think it's a good 14 are in what we would consider rural communities, or at least outside of the Golden Triangle, if you will, of Louisville, Lexington, and Northern Kentucky. Those three areas are great parts of the Commonwealth, but there's a lot of other areas that are important too. And our institutions play a significant role in terms of job opportunities, economic development, and educational opportunities that really make sure those communities are strong.
Collectively speaking, what would you consider to be the major contributions of the 18 colleges and universities in the IQ system?
Sure. I think it's a combination, actually, of all the things that we've been talking about. When you really think about the vibrancy of our institutions and what they provide, what they offer in each of their communities. You look here in Campbellsville, you look in some of our other communities, in many cases it's the largest employer. It's where a lot of the graduates and high-level, high-skilled workforce comes from. Specifically when you talk about teachers and nurses and some of those shortages that we deal with, our institutions are providing those professionals. 17 of the 18 institutions that we have strong, great teacher education programs. As we try and figure out for the next generation where good quality educators are going to come from, they're going to come from IQ institutions. So there's that unique contribution. And to the public at large, we do it at a very high efficient rate. Again, as we said, we aren't looking for direct monies that come from state government. We have a great public education system, higher ed and NK through 12. Let's put those dollars there. Our interest is in making sure that we get the scholarships and the grants in a way where the return is incredibly efficient. So for us, it's being a vibrant player and member of the rural communities across Kentucky in both workforce development, educational outcomes, and everything in between.
How do IQ institutions differ from, and there's no editorial veiled slam at the public universities or the public system, but how do they differ?
Sure. Well, they're each able to have their own independent mission, vision, and focus that, again, probably matters explicitly to that particular community. Campbellsville University knows what Campbellsville and Taylor Countyans need in particular. The same way with some of our other institutions, wherever they are. Berea has a specific mission and focus as Berea College and as a labor institution. Same with Alice Lloyd. Kentucky Wesleyan is a different mission institution. Brescia has its own. Each of our colleges are specific and important to what they provide and what they offer in a way that the public simply have a different mission to meet. So I'd say that that is one of the first things. And also, again, because of who they educate. When you really think about Kentucky, Kentucky is a rural state. It is a state that has some financial challenges in terms of the individuals and families. The fact that 50% of each of our institutions, or collectively, have students that come from low-income or Pell-eligible backgrounds means that our institutions are providing a quality education that meets some of those rural community values in a way that isn't costing too much additional dollars to the people at large and to the public, and they really make a vested interest in making sure that students can afford to go. So those are some of the ways where there's a uniqueness to each of our 18 institutions.
Now, what are some of the primary major public policy concerns? You've touched on this. Of IQ here in Kentucky. We have a new governor, General Assembly, and a budget session in 2020. What are the major concerns from the IQ perspective?
Sure. Well, the top concern, of course, is making sure that all those lottery dollars, as statutorily defined, are going towards higher education. I already mentioned KEYS, KTG, and CAP, and it's those three we want to make sure contribute to the success of our institutions. Last year, there were over $62 million that were used between those three for our institutions. Again, on average, it's a couple $1,000s for each one that go out to our students. Over 10,000 students were reached. So you think about that population that we just talked about, those are 10,000 students all across Kentucky that are getting a good quality education because of that, because of those scholarships and grants. So that's our top priority. We also want to make sure we keep the independence of the independence. To look at it from a federal level, we want to make sure that there's no tinkering around with what each of our private nonprofit institutions are asked to do or need to be doing, but that they're making sure that all their students are served, that their needs are met, and they're able to do that in a way that makes the most sense for their particular communities and the way that makes sense for their population of students.
At the federal level, we are in a presidential election year, congressional election year. A third of the Senate will be up for election, et cetera. There's a lot on the table there. We're still struggling with a multi-year reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. And without getting into the nitty-gritty and detail of that particular, on both sides of the aisle in Congress, there's more and more effort to put more accountability on the part of the higher education. Comment on that and how you see the direction. What are we headed in terms of federal, aside from funding and the importance of Pell Grants and loans and so forth, where are we headed in federal policy, do you think, in that regard?
Yeah, well, to your first point, of course, it's difficult to say what happens after next year.
Sure.
Which means that next year makes it very difficult for a whole lot to get done, as you have a lot of folks up for re-election and trying to maintain their spot in Congress and in Washington, D.C. But I think it is important that, as you mentioned, we have folks on both sides of the aisle who are very interested in making sure that higher education is strong, particularly the private higher education system. In fact, the single member of Congress who is a member of the Higher Education Caucus is Congressman James Comer.
Yes.
So he's got a strong commitment, which obviously he's got great institutions in his district. So we appreciate Congressman Comer for that effort. Really, it's just making sure that everybody understands that affordability is front and center, that access is front and center, but that doesn't mean what you do is put so much responsibility and regulatory burden on our institutions that they can't compete, that they can't do what they were intended to do and what their mission is. So that's one thing that we're going to be looking at over this next year. We've got a couple meetings scheduled already in Washington, D.C. I've got some good relationships up there with our congressional delegation, including our U.S. Senator, so I look forward to those conversations.
And certainly as a Christian institution, one of those things that we continuously always remind our congressional delegation, and they're very supportive of this, obviously, as you well know, from our perspective, and that of some of the other IQ, many of the other IQ members, is protecting that ability of a faith-based institution to maintain our faith-based approach to higher education while still being able to receive Title IV financial aid for our students. Now, none of us are wanting to discriminate,
Absolutely.
overtly discriminate against anyone.
Absolutely.
But the ability to still practice our faith and within the context of federal guidelines and federal regulations.
Yep, and you're right. That is something that our congressional delegation is very supportive of. It's something that matters to me, again, personally, and also in this role. So many of our institutions, faith is an important aspect of their mission. It's the core, it's the foundation. And that is something that we want to make sure that we preserve at the federal level.
On the Higher Education Committee in the House, I know Congressman Guthrie and Congressman Comer both have been very strong defenders of that and have actually intervened on occasion in recent years when that has been at least under discussion.
Yep.
You know, some efforts by some to change that at least, or to weaken that particular position. Now, there are also, and we've touched on this, but there is increased emphasis on in the context of not just higher education but post-secondary education, and more attention being given to, as you alluded, workforce development, work-ready programs. Sure. What is IQ's position on those programs?
Well, our position is the same as it would be for any program that promotes higher education. The way that we take a look at this is that when you think about post-secondary, it really is everything that comes after secondary. Secondary, of course, is 12th grade. You get your high school diploma. There's got to be something that you get, a credential of some kind, whether it's a certification, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctorate or terminal degree, whatever it might be, that signals to the employer community that you're employable, that you've got a set of skills. Or it signals to consumers or to people who are looking to buy something that you in fact have a skill that's worth paying for. And so our perspective is any programs and resources and initiatives that make it more affordable and make it easier for students to get a credential that the business community, that the market is saying is necessary and is needy, that's what we support. Of course, our main ones, the ones that capture everything, are those three big programs we like to highlight, CAP, KEYS, and KTG. But obviously the work-ready opportunities, the dual enrollment opportunities, as long as those things are beneficial to what our institutions need and what the business community is saying, we would be supportive of those as well.
And again, part of the beauty about the IQ schools is that you have those institutions who have basically their mission is not to be involved in those.
That's right.
Those programs.
That's right.
Even some not involved in dual credit.
That's right.
And certainly not in work ready or workforce development, staying with the liberal arts. And then there are those schools like Bellarmine that have dual credit to PhD. There are those like Campbellsville that have work ready to PhD.
That's right.
And a little bit of everything in between.
That's right. And each thing works for each institution, and that's our focus, is to make sure that each school, each college and university is finding what's best for them, as long as they're able to innovate and be flexible and nimble in the changing higher education market.
Do you think that the importance of the private sector, nonprofit sector, regionally accredited sector will even be more important as we move forward in the 21st century?
I do.
With the changing demands and the technology era in which the need to move quickly.
Yes.
And expeditiously to meet demands.
Absolutely. There's a book that we read within my doctorate program, College Unbound, by Jeffrey Selingo. It's a fascinating read. It talks about basically how colleges are coming unbound at the seams, where effectively you may get a piece of a credential here, or another piece there. You may decide to do your education online, which is what a lot of students are doing, and that's where a lot of the growth is. I think one thing also that's going to drive innovation and change and disruption is limited public dollars. It's no secret in Kentucky we've got some financial challenges through pensions and corrections and Medicaid and those types of things. Those are issues that obviously we need to address. But what that means is that our private institutions, our private nonprofit colleges really have an opportunity to step in the gap as our publics are trying to figure out how do we get more funding for their mission. We've got an opportunity to really meet some of these needs in a way that doesn't ask the public to give as much. And I think across the country you're going to see that as well. Campuses that are able to innovate, they're able to do some of the things that Campbellsville's been able to do, those are the institutions that are going to thrive. And so what we want to do at IQ is provide all the resources necessary for each of our institutions to figure out what that looks like for them. What does innovation look like for each institution? How do they continue to thrive, and make sure that they've got a unique value proposition where they can recruit and retain and ultimately graduate students.
IQ institutions can often move quicker
Yes.
and more easily than can a public university. And again, no criticism of public university, but the public university, we have accountability and standards. We have a board of trustees, first of all, and we have SACS,
Yes.
Commission on Colleges and Schools, and to some extent, CPE has to license the programs. But we don't have to move through a process
That's right.
with CPE as does the public university.
That's exactly right. It's
And
the benefit of being in private.
Yeah, we can move much quicker and make a decision on whether a program is feasible or not.
That's right.
And for us, at least at Campbellsville, again, part of it, does it meet our mission? Will it pay for itself? And to some extent, will it produce some net revenue?
Yep. I think that's excellent. I think that's the exact way to approach new programs and innovation.
And we have to assess in higher education, as we're doing, and Gary Cox led the charge with the foundation grant that you're familiar with, and Dr. Carter has made presentation to Dr. Thompson and CPE. You may have been in the meeting where you did that.
Yes, I was, yeah.
On the assessment of graduates in our academic programs. How much does it cost to graduate certain graduates coming out of certain academic programs? Doesn't mean we're necessarily going to shut down a particular program.
Right.
But we need to know in
Exactly.
higher ed how much it costs to produce a degree over here versus over here.
Exactly. And especially as you're trying to figure out what's the best way to utilize those resources, knowing where they're going is the first step.
What further changes do you see coming in higher education and post-secondary ed over the next, and we're down to 1 minute, we'll have to do this again very soon, but over the next 5 to 10 years, what changes are coming?
Well, I think each institution, particularly the privates, are going to have to figure out what their value proposition is. What makes them different from a public? What makes them different from a community college? What makes them different from a fellow private? And I think that's going to be the key over the next 5 to 10 years. Is it online innovation? Is it workforce development? Is it a liberal arts core? Whatever it is, each institution is going to have to figure it out. The good news is all of our institutions at IQ are in a great place to do that, and Campbellsville is one of those leaders.
O.J. Oleka, thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
Congratulations on the presidency of the Association of Independent Kentucky Colleges and Universities. We wish you Godspeed, and we know IQ and our schools are in good hands with your leadership.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is John Chowning with O.J. Oleka, thanking our audience for being with us for dialogue on public issues. Thank you.